Welcome. So today, got a really cool deck for you, something I've been working on for quite a bit. It's a really different take on a really underutilized leader, in my opinion. Gonna break it down for you one by one. We're gonna talk about all the cool interactions it's got, and here we go. So, the deck is a Grand Inquisitor Cunning deck, focusing on an interaction with Sneak Attack. Sneak Attack's a really cool card. It lets you cheat out units. They come in ready, and they die at the end of the turn, which is quite a big downside. But we're going to try to use Grand Inquisitor to maximize Sneak Attack as much as possible, and some other really cool red villain cards that work really well with it. So, the deck list is right here. What I'm going to do is break down each component of the deck, talk about all the cards. Do want to preface that this deck, although very fun and pretty powerful, is not, I wouldn't rate this as like a tier 1 deck. I don't think it's as good as kind of the more established things like the Boba Greens, the Sabine Greens, the green-blue villain control decks. I think it has some play into those decks, and I'll talk a little bit about those matchups later. But it's not at that power level, but it's different. It plays a lot of unique cards. It's got some really explosive turns, and I think it'll catch some people off guard. So, yeah, I think it's a good time. All right, so first off, Sneak Attack targets. These two have nothing to do with Grand Inquisitor specifically. They're just powerful cards to sneak in. Ruthless Raider specifically is kind of a beast. It comes in at 5 cost with Sneak Attack, potentially even cheaper if you've got a Jabba the Hutt in play that makes the Sneak Attack cheaper, or a Bib Fortuna to cheat out the Sneak Attack also. It comes in, it deals 2 damage to their base, 2 damage to a unit. You get a free an attack for 4 from it, and then when it dies, it does the same thing, deal 2 to the unit and the base. So it potentially represents 8 base damage and 4 unit damage when it comes into play. It can close games out really quickly, getting sneaked in. And the other one is Palpatine, who at 7 cost is pretty strong. Ideally, you want to try to get even a double discount on him with Jabba the Hutt or Bib, like we were talking about. He comes in, he kind of plays the card Overwhelming Barrage. That's kind of what he's doing, right? He's dealing 6 to everything. But then you also get a readied 6/6, which can finish off another unit and overwhelm a bunch of damage in, or just go 6 to the base. When Palpatine comes out early, you're kind of just playing a board wipe in a sense. So, you're down a card because of the Sneak Attack. But if you're killing a bunch of things and dealing a bunch of base damage, that can be okay. And then we've got the Grand Inquisitor's little crew. Now, a lot of these cards all these cards work pretty well with Sneak Attack, primarily because of Grand Inquisitor. So normally the downside of Sneak Attack is, well, you get your attack, the unit dies, not that much value, but the fact that all of these have 3 power and can get readied by Grand Inquisitor gives you a double activation the turn they come in. So they come in ready, they get their attack, Inquisitor readies them, they attack again. Your opponent's probably less inclined to actually spend removal on them because they're going to die at the end of the turn. But if they do, you've kind of evened out the card disadvantage that Sneak Attack caused. Seventh Sister's great being coming in on 4 resources, even 3 resources sometimes. She can deal 2 instances of 3 damage to the base and 3 damage to a unit, possibly killing 2 units or 1 big unit, while also getting base damage. Fifth Brother, just so you know, for 2 costs, you can do 8 damage to base with Fifth Brother. He comes in ready, he does the 2 attack plus his self ping to himself, so he hits for 3. Grand Inquisitor readies him, takes another 2 damage, then he can attack for 5. You can also sequence it a little differently so that you can get the ping on the second attack. There's some cool things you can do with this interaction and another card later, which I'll talk about. And then 7th Fleet and Boba, these are just awesome 3-cost cunning units. They're maybe the 2 best generically powerful 3-cost units. And you're usually not using Sneak Attack on them, but they can represent 6 damage just for 2 costs, both of them. Boba actually can kill, snipe units when he comes in ready, right? If there's a exhausted unit with 3 health, he can free kill it, then you can ready him and get some base damage. And 7th Fleet too. Look, if the 6 damage is going to kill your opponent, it doesn't matter that the unit's going to die at the end of the turn. All right, now we're going to talk about a little bit about these other units. Let's talk first about the 2 1-drops. 3 power is great. We are an aggressive deck. We are trying to do base damage. We suffer a lot of card disadvantage in this deck, so we can't have this game go on forever. Ideally, we pressure early so that later in the game, when we start sneaking in or just playing Ruthless Raiders, we're able to kind of close the game pretty quickly, especially the turn that Grand Inquisitor actually comes in. Bib Fortuna and Crafty Smuggler are both shielded 2-drops, which work really well with Fallen Lightsaber. You play them, Fallen Lightsaber on them, really strong. You don't really do that against a deck playing Power of the Dark Side, the villain blue decks, because you can't invest so much into one unit, especially early, or they're gonna make you sacrifice it. Note also that Fallen Lightsaber on a Crafty Smuggler is still in takedown range, which is difficult for him, but Bib Fortuna actually holds it and doesn't suffer that. Bib Fortuna also has the discount on the events, which is nice with sneak attack, giving you a double cheat on units. It also works well with Force Throw and Force Choke, primarily because you can go turn 1 Bib Fortuna, turn 2 Fifth Brother, and now you can pay that 1 energy to either Force Choke or Force Throw on turn 2, which is really powerful tempo. Pirate Starfighter, cool card. Very little to do with this in this set, except here I kind of like it. I've got all 6 1-drops, which means on turn 2 you can bounce the 1-drop you played on the first turn and replay it. Bonus points if you're already able to attack with that 1-drop. Pirated Starfighter is basically the same power level as a 7th Fleet Defender, so having more options to kind of do that kind of play, right? Get a really strong space unit into play. And there's some cool things you can do with it with sneak attack, especially when you use sneak attack on some cheaper units. For instance, 4 resources, sneak attack Fifth Brother. We do our 8 damage like I talked about. Play 2 resources, play the Pirated Starfighter, bring the Fifth Brother back to our hand. There's 2 of them. It's a very situational card. It's not always going to work out, but it's got some power. Bosk. It doesn't have much synergy specifically in this deck. It's just a good card. We play a lot of cheap events too. And on top of that, the 5 resource turn, we try to get priority going into our 6 resource turn, and Bosk helps with that because, well, he's going to be the only card we play on the 5 resource, and he automatically attacks. So we kind of cheat our actions a little bit there. And yeah, the Fallen Lightsaber here, I put it under Bib and Crafty Smuggler. It's good with them. It's also great with Fifth Brother, Grand Inquisitor. It's a pretty strong card. We are an aggressive deck. We want to try to deal as much base damage early so that our sneaks can kind of finish the job. All right, the tricks. So we talked about sneak attack. We filled out with 4 other tricks, 2 waylays, 1 asteroid sanctuary, 1 shoot first. The actual tricks you play, I mean, you can change this up, play the ones you like more. The reason I have up to 7, or at the minimum I probably want 6, is because Jabba the Hutt, I want to play him because I want him to find sneak attacks. He's also pretty good with Grand Inquisitor because he's got such a huge butt that we can keep reading him and, hit for 2, hit for 2, hit for 2. Your opponent doesn't really want to spend time dealing with Jabba. The trick discount's great too, especially with sneak attack. But the issue is if we go too low on tricks, he's whiffing too much. His power level comes down. So, 6 or 7, it's still going to miss sometimes, but I don't want to load this deck full of, air. I don't want to play, 3 Asteroid Sanctuaries, 3 Shoot First, and just, have about a bunch of clunkers that I'm going to draw. I split them up because, they're all kind of good in different spots. Waylay's the most generically powerful card here. But, feel free to mess around with this pile. I think, the numbers themselves aren't locked in any way. All right, and some interaction. Force Throw. I mean, I love this card. Made a whole video about a Chirrut deck with Force Throw. It's fantastic. It's not quite as good as it is in the hero counterpart versions because we've only got Fifth Brother and Seventh Sister, and our leader also comes out on 6. But if you can get this off, it's really strong. Fifth Brother, you got to try to protect him as much as possible. The interaction I talked about with Bib is really strong, where you can go Fifth Brother on turn 2 and Force Throw. Love this card. Very game swinging, very powerful. Don't forget that you can target yourself with it, throw a Palpatine at a Boba Fett and just one-shot it. It's pretty satisfying. Force Choke and Open Fire, we got 2 of each. The third is going to be in the sideboard for both of them. You got to have some removal. This deck really will mostly be the control deck against the Sabine deck. So we're going to want those extra removal, especially out of the sideboard against them. But they're strong. Sometimes things need to die, and Force Choke specifically, especially when you have a force unit in play, is a big tempo swing, lets you advance your board while also removing something your opponent has. All right, sideboard, I briefly talked about it. We got the third Force Choke and the third Open Fire, which we'll bring in against Sabine. No Good to Me Dead. It's a very strong card, but it kind of diverges a little bit from our aggressive game plan. Although I think against Boba Fett, you probably want to bring this card in and try to slow down their flip turn so that they don't kind of run away with the game there. Surprise Strike, bring this in probably against control decks like Iden or Krennic or Darth Vader. Be able to push a little more damage, a little more aggressively, because they're going to win the long game. Force Surrender is another card that we bring in against control for the massive 4-for-1 potential that it has, especially if they're just kind of sitting there trying to remove all your stuff. Got 1 Change of Heart here too to fill it out. This is another decent card against Boba, especially because of the Fett's Fire Spray. They can play it. If you can end a turn with initiative when it's in play and take it from them, representing a lot of damage, and sometimes those games do come down to just kind of erase. All right, I want to talk about Jetta, which is, I think, a little bit underappreciated as a base, and I think it has a ton of potential with Grand Inquisitor specifically. So because all the units we play or most of the units we play can come into play ready, we can use this much more proactively. For instance, playing against Sabine, they went turn 1 A-Wing. We just have initiative, Jetta before the A-Wing attacks. Okay, we've saved the damage already. Then we can play 7th Fleet Defender. We can ready our 7th Fleet Defender. We can destroy the A-Wing. The 7th Fleet Defender still lives, right? Same thing will apply for like a ground unit if they led with Battlefield Marine. This can basically work against any deck though, right? Any deck that's going to play a unit that would die to your turn 2 play, like our Boba Fett on the ground, our 7th Fleet Defender in the air, even our 1-drop 3/1s, we can, proactively use this. I think it's really strong in that sense. It easily makes up for the base damage that we suffer, the 5 that we're paying for it, because we're not only preventing damage, we're also destroying a unit with it, right? So like in the instance with the A-Wing, we prevented 3 damage and we killed an A-Wing. That's easily worth 2 life, no-brainer. Other cool things you can do with this, especially with Bosk, you just use it before you Bosk. Your Bosk comes in, it kills something, it lives with 5 health. Often the issue with Bosk is after it kills something, it just dies to their next unit. This gives him a better chance to survive into your next turn, where he can start triggering his damage. So I like Jetta a lot with Grand Inquisitor. I think the ability to just use it much more proactively, where it's much harder for your opponent to kind of dodge its effect, like by removing your unit. Well, your unit's not even in play yet, so you can often get good value out of this. Yeah, so as you can see, I'm sad. Tarkin Town's a beating against Grand Inquisitor. I don't really know what else to say about it. It's not getting played in like the best decks right now, so you got that going for you. For decks that are playing Tarkin Town, you really can't be doing your Grand Inquisitor shenanigans until that Tarkin Town gets eaten up, in which case I probably lean more towards actively trying to trade. Like, instead of going face with Boba, just to kill their Battlefield Marine or something, if they're like a Leia with deck with Tarkin Town. Just force them to use this card so you can start doing the things you need to do. If you're doing like a sneak attack play and you need to ready the thing, I mean, if they're using their Tarkin Town there, it's more okay because now they're spending removal on a card that was going to die anyway. But this card's tough. If it's everywhere, it definitely would make me want to play this a little less. But you can try to manage it. All right, I'm not going to go like super in depth this time on all these meta decks. Grand Inquisitor is not on the level of these decks. Like, this deck is not going to consistently beat them. but it can beat them. I have beaten all of these decks with this Grand Inquisitor deck, and I'll talk a little bit about what I'll do. So with Sabine, I'm mostly the control. I want to open fire and force choke things. I want to use the Grand Inquisitor ready ability to just kind of clear the board as much as possible. Sometimes with a turn 2 Fallen Lightsaber on one of your turn 1 plays, you can pressure them enough that it forces them to actually try to trade with your ground units, which is really good for you. And the nice thing you have going for you is that you're actually able to close games out very fast. So there are games where other decks will like stabilize against a Sabine, but they can't finish her off quickly enough, and then she'll draw into burn, like 4 cost, I believe in, or like K2s, or just like get enough things into play where like you were in control, but you couldn't kill them quickly enough. Grand Inquisitor, this deck will kill pretty quickly. As for Boba Fett, as the strategy in general against him is just trying to make his flip turn as awkward as possible so he can't get like the full 8, right? The kill something, ready a resource, deploy, attack, ready 2 more resources, play a 3-drop. It's really hard to come back from. You want to pressure them early with your 1-drops. You got the 3-power 1-drops. You got your Crafty Smuggler. You got your good space units. Make them try to play defense a little bit against you. Hopefully you can get a force throw off, which can kind of help. Like these cheap cards that you have like force throw and force choke are good at catching up in tempo that the Boba generates. And you want to be pressuring them so that your Ruthless Raiders can come in and really represent like significant damage to them that they won't race you. It's a tough matchup. Barrage specifically is really hard for you to deal with, but you have some shielded units, so sometimes you're able, instead of readying something that has a shield, maybe you keep it on just to force make the barrage a little weaker. And then like Iden or Krennic, like these green blue control decks that are strong, you need to play around like the power of the dark side specifically, so you can't really gear up with a Fallen Lightsaber early on units. Takedown, they have them. It's not actually like a game breaker for you. Most of your good units cost 3, so they're usually trading down resources there. Your best card in this matchup by far is Ruthless Raider. They don't have clean ways of dealing with it. It represents a ton of damage against them. But again, for this matchup, you definitely want to just be pushing as much damage early to make those like that Grand Inquisitor flip turn a little more potent. The Ruthless Raiders, like chaining those, like if you can play 2 Ruthless Raiders, you're going to be in decent shape against them. So that's a card I'd be very hesitant not to resource. And then like I said, we talked about the sideboard stuff, like the Forced Surrenders are good here. The Surprise Strikes to generate a little more damage, pretty solid. All right, so this is a work in progress. I'm going to keep tweaking this deck a bit, trying to make it as best as I can. Definitely gonna keep tabs on it as more cards get released, because I think Grand Inquisitor is gonna have a lot of more synergy as more cards come out, as more things that his like readying ability works with. But here's a few cards that I'd consider. Force Lightning is pretty strong. It's just tough to trigger the Force event in this deck consistently enough, and this one eats up a lot of your turn if you want to kill something big, and that's why I've opted with Force Throw and Force Choke, which kind of always costs 1 or 2, as opposed to Force Lightning, where it's like real implication starts mattering when you're paying 3 or 4 for it to destroy some bigger units. But I think it's something worth playing around with. ISB Agent is another decent 1-drop that would work with Pirated Starfighter. We have enough events to trigger this. It actually can ready with Grand Inquisitor, so you can kill 2 health units with him by pinging them and then attacking into them. I just don't find that is that relevant right now, and the ping isn't great. But you know, if you see a lot of shields or lower, or like playing against people who play a lot of 1-drops, like he'd be really good against this deck, right? He'd kill the Stormtrooper, he'd kill the Greedo, he'd pop off shields consistently, so I think there's some potential there. Cartel Spacer is decent. He can get readied by Grand Inquisitor. My issue is it doesn't really favorably interact with other space units that get played right now, and there's no way to really buff this guy's power. If you're playing more shoot first though in your deck, you can consider it, because then it can start killing A-Wings and like red 3s and stuff like that. Surprise Strike is another card. It's in the sideboard right now. I think there's merit to putting it in the main deck and becoming even more aggressive, trying to race even more decks. Admiral Mahdi is another kind of combo-centric card. Him and Keep Fighting kind of pull that together. I prefer him because he can ready like a Ruthless Raider and like a buffed up Grand Inquisitor or something. But very situational, and I've opted away from that. And then Strafing Gunship is strong. The card's very good. My issue with it is in most cases when I was playing with it, it just ended up being a 4-cost 7 Fleet Defender. Like I would play it, I would ready it, I would attack their base for 3, and then I'd be left with a 3-2, which is exactly what happens with a 7 Fleet Defender. It kind of happens with the Pirated Starfighter too. If you want to start clearing ground units with it, that's good. The issue is if it's only got 2 health after getting readied, it can't really kill big things anymore because it'll just die. So I found that it was a little too slow for what I wanted to do, but I think there's potential there, especially if you wanted to slow the deck down and play more reactive, which is also an option. All right, and then we got budget. So, you know, this deck it's not a tier 1 deck. It's not something I'd be like, you have to go buy all these cards right now and play with it. I think it's super fun. I think it's strong. I think it can beat tier 1 decks. But before you go out and shell out $150 or whatever it is right now for Boba Fett, maybe test it out and see if you like it. So you can try some of these other 3-drops, Cell Block Guard, Swoop Racer, Starwing Scout. They're like fairly strong. Unfortunately, like 2 of those don't even work with Grand Inquisitor's ability, but there really aren't that many 3-drops that do. I like having the 9 proactive 3-drops in this deck, but if you're going to opt towards something else, like you could play Surprise Strikes in the main deck, no Good to Me Dead. You can play some more 2-drops, like a Viper Probe. But these are some options, especially like the rest of the deck is incredibly cheap. Like the rares in it are, I think, like maybe $2 each. It plays like 8 or 9 of them. So outside of the Boba Fett, it's a very affordable deck. So if you don't have the Boba Fett and you just want to like mess around with this, those are kind of some ideas to play around with. All right, so that's what I got for you with this one. I'm going to keep working on it, keep tweaking on it. I hope some of you can pick this up. Maybe let me know if you have any suggestions, because I kind of really like this deck. I want it to work as best as it can. So if you mess around with something and you find that it works better than something that's in here, put a message in the comments. I'll make sure to test it out. I'll see if we can like tune this up and get it as good as it can be. I'd really appreciate if you like this video. Shoot a like on the video. Give me a subscribe. That would mean so much to me if you do that. And stay tuned. I'll be making some more content in the near future. See you later.